Good morning to everyone. My name is Joe Sims, and you are watching This Week in the News, the weekly broadcast brought to you by the editors of peoplesworld.org. And joining me this morning are Sue Webb, our co-editor. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning.
And top of the morning to you. And good morning, and Terry Albano. Good morning, also our co-editor, and the recent recipient of the Silver Feather Award from the Illinois Women's Press Association. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Sue. Thanks for that.
And congratulations. Let's get started. There's a lot going on in the news this week, and let's start with the Washington Post. Their lead article today, actually they posted it yesterday, says that Mrs. Clinton is waiting for Lefty. Or actually, the implication is that Lefty has arrived, Lefty being the U.S. electorate. And what they're arguing is that the political climate among the people has, or at least on the part of the Democratic Party's constituency, has moved to the left, and that Mrs. Clinton is running as the most liberal Democratic presidential candidate in recent memory, probably as liberal or more liberal than George McGovern. You guys remember George McGovern when he ran in '68? I do. I had such a crush on one of the campaign workers. Man, I was 9 years old, and she came by the house and rock my world. But anyway, what do you think? Is the Post right? Has the Democratic Party's constituency shifted to the left? And what's your opinion, Sue?
Well, I think that actually the American electorate in general has shifted in a progressive direction on a wide range of issues over the decades. Questioning, this whole concept of the 99% that was raised during the Occupy movement, a rather short-lived Occupy movement, but that concept struck a chord very, very, very broadly. So, then there are issues, it's a kind of class consciousness, if you will. Then there are, a whole range of social issues. The concept of inequality, the whole range of social issues that the Post article mentions, and then among younger people.
Well, I can see what you're saying amongst younger people, but why is it that the Republicans won the last midterm elections if the electorate is shifted?
Yeah, why? Well, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with government. Some of it justifiable, and some of it a result of the, successful use of propaganda by the Fox News Republican right crowd. This sort of anti-government, hey, get the government off my Medicare, out of my Medicare kind of thing. There's a lot of confusion. But I think
a lot of people are receiving the Medicare now, so they're kind of shifting their opinions a little. I mean, they get Medicare, and they're also benefiting from Obamacare.
Right. So, there's a lot of work to be done. On the other hand, I think more the government includes a Congress even before the last elections that was hamstrung by the Republicans. They controlled the House, and the margin of the Democrats in the Senate was very tiny. So you had, that blocking pro-people legislation. You have a Supreme Court that, has ruled negatively on a lot of important issues that affect working class people.
Well, let me ask Terry here. Terry, do you agree with the Post? Has Mrs. Clinton, in your opinion, positioned herself as the most quote-unquote liberal candidate in recent memory?
Well, I think, first of all, this she's going into a primary, so she wants to assemble a similar or the same coalition as Barack Obama assembled during his '08 and 2012 runs. So the primary voters in the Democratic Party are going to be, I think, of a more progressive, liberal character too. So it's not going to hurt her, as the Post article points out, in the general election to take these positions, which are, as Sue mentioned, based a lot on inequality, income inequality, other inequalities. The affordable college, making college more affordable, student debt issues, the minimum wage. But if you look at it, even amongst more moderate or, that part of the coalition that didn't turn out, say in 2010, when the Republicans did sweep or got reelected to state offices, and then took also the Senate, those voters also voted to raise the minimum wage in the 2010 election in state after state that are supposedly red states. So in Arkansas, even in Illinois, where we got a Republican governor, etc., all the votes came in to raise the minimum wage. So I think that is in particular, a huge issue. Wages, $15 an hour, etc. So in that sense, I think it's very smart of Hillary Clinton to do that, to take these types of positions.
So is it a case of, they once, Nixon, I think, had the strategy of running far to the right in the Republican primary and then back to the center for the general election. So do you think that that's kind of what's going on here as well, that Mrs. Clinton will, try to guarantee her base in the primaries, and then when she gets past the Democratic Party convention in August and September of next year, she'll start thinking about those independent voters in the Midwest, East, and South. Is that maybe what's going on? Anybody?
Well, Joe,
Yeah.
I think that's what every candidate does. In the primary, they're geared towards winning the base within their party, winning the majority within their party. But once they become the candidate, then they have to appeal to a much wider spectrum from right to left. So that's what they all do to some extent. Can I bring up something related here, which is I see an item, it's actually in the British newspaper, The Guardian, that Rick Santorum, one of the most extreme right, he's in Iowa, he's positioning, trying to run a campaign, and he has taken up the slogan that the conservative re-elected Prime Minister David Cameron in Britain took up. He says he's a blue-collar conservative. He's running, he is projecting and repeating the mythology that's out there, and they're trying to make it into a self-fulfilling prophecy that union voters, by whom they mean white union voters, are conservative. And I think that any candidate has to appeal to the broad working class population of this country, union voters and non-union voters, working class people, white and black, and that means tackling, I think, these fundamental issues of inequality that is roiling people and leads some people to move, choose a right-wing candidate because of their false populism. So, and I think Bernie Sanders is playing a good role in that regard in terms of emphasizing those issues.
Now let me ask you, because you mentioned the issue of inequality and appealing to all of those people, but in that connection, how do you define left? I mean, don't you also, have to deal with issues of, gender and issues of race and issues of, say, war and peace. Now, you take the last issue, war and peace. Um, do you think Mrs. Clinton is taking liberal positions on international issues? I mean, during the her tenure as Secretary of State, she was rather outspoken in her, you know, development and positing of the notion of American exceptionalism and taking hawkish positions around Libya and Syria and trying to position herself a little bit to the right of. So, can you really be a progressive, as thankfully some of them like to call themselves now, and take those kinds of positions on international issues? Terry?
I think you should ask Sue about that. She's our international expert. As she voted for, as everybody knows, she voted for that Iraq War authorization. I think that was a huge, mark against her in terms of foreign policy, and kind of lives with her. I don't know what she's been saying in terms of the foreign policy stuff, so I can't say whether it's more hawkish than we already have known of Hillary Clinton or less hawkish. So I kind of don't like being boxed into these, what's progressive, what's liberal, what's left, because I think in any situation, in any particular election, these issues come up, and candidates and the electorate react to them, and oftentimes it's not necessarily just a progressive agenda or what have you, but I also don't like getting boxed in because what is liberal? What does that mean anyway in terms of I guess positions? Because even if you consider yourself liberal or left, you are still taking all sorts of spectrum of positions on any given topic. But in a direct answer to your question, of course we would want a more progressive, a more less investment in war type of foreign policy, and much more in terms of not only diplomacy, but tackling some of the development issues, the extreme inequalities going on in the world, the total corporate attempts in many instances to take over the natural resources of countries, etc. So
Right.
Of course we want a more radical change. Anyway, so
Sue, what do you think?
Well,
Progressives Clinton on foreign policy issues? How do you define that?
first of all, the American public tends to be not very interested in foreign policy matters
Right.
unless there's an active war going on that our troops are on the front lines of. So while the Iraq War was going on, there was a lot of opinion about it, and growing opposition to it, wide opposition to it. But once it ended, do people care what's going on in Iraq now? No. The ISIS, I just see a report, they just took over a major city in Anbar province, Ramadi, that was on the tip of everybody's tongue during the war because there was a lot of fighting there, a lot of our soldiers died, or a lot of Iraqis died, and so on. So now ISIS took it over, but it's not a big news item. And anyway, so foreign policy is not a big item, and I don't think Hillary Clinton has talked about foreign policy very much during this campaign.
that's why I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, she does have a record. I think she's more hawkish than Obama. She's been more hawkish than Obama. And I agree with what Terry said that, well, you're not going to get a pure candidate For those of our listeners who consider themselves on the left, maybe favor socialist solution and so on and so forth. We have Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a socialist, but we're not going to have. This election is not about moving towards socialism. It's about which direction to go in the phase that we're in.
How about being able to breathe? Isn't that an issue that most Americans are concerned about? Isn't climate change an international issue, and shouldn't we be concerned about it? And if we're not concerned about it, shouldn't we be raising that issue? Just as an example of one of the.
Let me just say that the movement, the peace movement in this country is very small. The organizations trying to mobilize around. If you go to a peace rally, you'll see a lot of gray-haired people. It's very limited. So, and so the positions that people like Hillary Clinton take and others are reflective of that.
But we marched in September at the in New York against climate change, and there were tens of thousands of people of all nationalities. And Terry?
Well, a little interesting item I had seen was that, Hillary has, she gets money from all over, right? Including from those who might be lobbying for Keystone Pipeline. And, Bill McKibben from 350.org had seen a meme, or somebody who runs their account had seen a meme of that alludes to all this supposed cash that Hillary may be getting from these forces. So that meme went all over the place in terms of the environmental and climate change movement. But it originated with the far-right crowd. So,
in fact, just on that point, I saw another article in the Times yesterday, which is the far right is challenging the left to disown themselves from Mrs. Clinton. Why don't you take her on?
That's exactly the same article I had seen this item. So, so the fact of the matter is that yes, climate change is a huge issue, and I am sure that a Clinton administration, a Sanders administration, would continue and hopefully have a Congress that would be willing to continue to push forward on curbing carbon and other greenhouse gases, and some of the Obama policies that he has implemented that are currently and have been under attack by fossil fuel industry. I don't see that happening at all with any of the Republican candidates. And so, you have to have these kind of pure views, as Sue had mentioned before. We're not going to have pure candidates. So to have pure views in any kind of electoral situation, it's just, it's just not a realistic thing. That said, there's a lot from now until 2016 that can help. Events will happen, but also people's organizing and protests, etc., are going to happen. That's going to raise this issue up on climate change. And you also have to realize a lot of people in the United States don't believe it's even happening. So, not saying it's the majority, but it's a lot, and that too, we have to challenge and factor in, and the candidates would also have to also.
That's true. And recall that we began this conversation with the notion as put forward by the Post that the electorate is moving left, and what that means in terms of how the positions that the candidates are taking, both with regard to domestic policy and international policy. And on domestic policy, we know it means we're for raising the minimum wage, and we're for marriage equality, and we're for funding the EPA and stopping Keystone. And an international policy, therefore, we're asking the question of what does it mean to be left liberal now, and the need to define that so that we can have an impact on the elections. Now, speaking of international policy, so the Vatican just recognized Palestine as a state. Will that have a big impact internationally? Has it, and will it influence thinking here in the United States?
Well, I think so. It's a symbolic thing. Obviously, it doesn't have really any concrete effect, but it has a great symbolic significance, I think, and it's part of the momentum where a number of European countries now in Parliament, sections of Parliament are pressing for recognition. Sweden recognized the state of Palestine, but there is big momentum in other Western European countries, and those are also symbolic things. But it begins to build pressure where there's going to be economic pressure particularly from the European Union on Israel. What will it take to, with this new government that's been put in place in Israel is said to be the most right-wing in Israel's history, with people who are just denying any concept of two-state solution and denying any national rights for the Palestinian people. So what's it going to take? It's going to take, I think, some severe economic pressure. And, of course, the United States, first of all, which provides $3 billion a year in aid to Israel. And, that's going to be a hot one. But
now, speaking of economic pressure, has the People's World editorial board taken a position on the issue of divestment? If so, what is it?
Well, we don't like vote on things. I think we try to assess movements and developments. And I think that at one time, there's this boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which has tended to be a narrow movement. And there are two aspects. One is to boycott or divest from goods or divest from companies that are located in the West Bank or produce stuff in the West Bank, which is occupied, illegally occupied territory. So that's one type. The other is boycott, divest from Israel, Green Line, the Green Line Israel, recognized. Anyway, I think the situation is evolving, where what had been a more narrow position now with the actions of the Israeli government and its move further to the right, those things take on a different aspect. So, particularly I think the divestment issue, which is, a number of denominations in the United States have moved to divest their holdings in companies that are related to military, the Israeli military, and the occupation, that kind of thing. I think that's growing. So, we would support those things. But a lot of it has to do whether it narrows down the movement or broadens the movement, and that changes over time.
Good point. Now, speaking of a broad movement and the need to, take positions on it, we were talking last week about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and last week there was a big victory in the Senate when they didn't vote on it. But that was turned around in 48 hours, and they voted to begin debate. And oh, what a debate. And there's a big issue that needs to be debated, because I read just yesterday that part of the provisions that the Democrats were arguing for was training for workers who would be displaced by the deal. They would lose their jobs because they would be presumably exported abroad. And don't you know that in exchange for that, the Republicans placed a provision in the deal that calls for an $800 million cut to Medicare. $800 billion, damn near. And so what's going on with these Democrats? You know, one day they vote against it, and the president calls them into the White House, and they agree, and then they doing it on the backs of, and imagine what kind of position that puts workers in. You want to trade off job training to your grandmother not being able to pay her hospital bill, or grandpa can't pay for his cancer treatment. I mean, what the hell's going on? What do you guys think about that? Terry?
I'm still thinking about the Palestinian issue right now, and so I just want to backtrack on that because something interesting occurred to me during that discussion, and that was you're talking about what's a left view on foreign policy. Well, if you remember, you know, taking a position that a two-state solution was needed in the United States was a left, or not, it was a progressive view. And now, you know, that is a widely accepted. However, at this point, at this juncture, you know, negotiations have been, whatever, stalled, stymied. They're not going forward. You have this right-wing government in Israel. So now these other, Vatican is recognizing it as a symbol. The United States does not agree with that way around it. So all of a sudden you have this, you know, this, how situations evolve, and you can't just say, you know, this is a left view, this is a, you know, a progressive view or not. Anyway, you know, Clinton also got in big trouble. Well, she got a lot of pushback back in the 90s when she talked about, you know, recognizing the need for a Palestinian state and everything. So, you know, these things evolve, and I don't know, I just struck by these kind of contradictory things. But
it's
as
a
to
little bit
the
of a moving target.
Huh?
It's a little bit of a moving target, you're saying.
Well, yeah, and it develops over time. But as to the TPP, you know, and these cuts, this is what happens with these Republicans too. They demand, you know, you're going to spend money on retraining workers. We're going to take it from someplace else. And so I think in order for whatever the Democrats, the president wanting to get something done, they swallowed a poison pill on this. I don't know if they see somehow in going forward to being able to restore it. You know, a lot of times you get this deal where, you know, some cuts, you know, come down and then they try to restore them in some other kind of process. So, you know, it's a making sausage process. Hopefully there'll be a big enough, you know, outrage from the people about Medicare cuts that they will be forced to restore it. So this, you know, it's messy and it's ugly and it's certainly not what we need in terms of investment in people in our country, which we have enough wealth to do. Yes. But anyway, but that's part of the problem with these ultra-conservatives in control.
Well, thank you very much, Terry and Sue. It is 8:29, and we have 1 minute left. You've been watching This Week in the News, brought to you by the editors of peoplesworld.org. We encourage you to visit our website at www.peoplesworld.org and read our articles. Visit us on Facebook. Send in your opinions and questions, and we would be more than happy to answer them. We've been debating domestic and foreign policy and the positions of the Democrats and the Republicans and the trade unions and the women's movement and the Black Lives Matter movement and the LGBTQ movement, and we'll be doing so each week, every Monday at 8 o'clock. Let's leave it there. We're off to work. and we wish you a great week. And congratulations once again to the editors of People's World for your awards. Keep up, let us all, myself included, keep up the good work. Thank you, and have a great week.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.